This is a Viva PR podcast.
We're a community of people that want to help. I mean, if you don't have that in your personality, you're not going to last long. And when I walked into that room full of these people, I just was like, here's my tribe, which sounds corny, but it truly was. It doesn't cost you anything to send a ladder down in life. And she said, if you're asking me that question, then you absolutely need to be on this course.
Welcome to PR in the Real World, the podcast that's built episode by episode on three things. 1, stories that resonate. 2, real people. 3, real challenges. And in this episode, we meet someone whose story I'm sure will resonate with anyone who's ever felt like they were doing it all along. Leanne Hughes has spent most of her career working in public sector comms roles, where often she was the only PR person in the organisation. No team to lean on or bounce ideas off. Just her instincts and her inbox. And for a long time, that meant feeling like an outsider in her own industry. But everything started to shift when Leanne found her tribe through CommsCamp, the Headspace community, and as part of the first socially mobile cohort. This is a conversation about building confidence, I guess, and reaching out and learning that asking for help isn't a weakness, it's how you grow. Whether you're just starting out or leading a team, Leanne's story is a great reminder of what's possible when people offer you support. And crucially, you reach out and take it. Let's crack on. So Leanne, pleasure to meet up, and it's fascinating listening to what you're doing when we were talking before the red light came on. When we spoke to Sarah Waddington a few weeks back and we talked about the whole ethos of our podcast, PR in the Real World, where we want to shine a light on the professionals who are doing the job in the industry, who don't always get the limelight and who are definitely not after seeking the spotlight, she said, you need to speak to Leanne. And she talked about the work that you do with CommsCamp and that you were on the first socially mobile cohort. Tell us a little bit about your career and why Sarah is such a big fan, do you think?
Well, I'm her biggest fangirl, so that we could just fangirl together, Sarah and I. My career, I suppose, bit of a strange one, a bit of a meandering one, because I studied at uni. I studied media and film at uni in Sheffield. I think it's more than 30 years ago now. I think my 30th anniversary of studying was up recently. Always had an interest in comms and media, and actually wanted to do film production for like when I was a young person, but life meant that I had to go straight into work when I was 21, 22, and I worked in investment banking actually straight out of uni, sort of like a specialist trainer in finance training on systems and working around that, which was completely different and not where I was heading. And it took me a few years working and traveling around the world actually to find my place back in comms. And I went to work at NHS in my middle 20s in a comms role, and then stayed at the NHS for about 21 years. After that, working in different roles with the comms and digital campaign focus really is what I've always done. Working in sexual health, young people's sexual health was my main sort of job. Women's health, mental health, and then latterly national NHS, looking at regulations and the kind of like more quality assurance stuff. Then from there, I've moved into a commercial role now. So work with a digital agency who specialise in paid media, and I only work with public sector folks. So moved to the other side of the desk in the last year.
A world away from investment banking then.
Absolutely. I have no idea how I ended up there, and I was always a bit of a weirdo in that in that world.
You've said though that for many years, I mean, on the surface, your CV looks really impressive, but for many years you've said that you felt like an outsider. What's helped you feel like you belong these days? And how did that kind of feeling like an outsider manifest itself?
I worked in a multidisciplinary team for a long time, so I was the only comms support working with other professionals. So I'm a solo comms support with a bit of a dotted line into corporate comms, but it was all on me to give advice. And when you don't have a team around you, that's can be solitary, and you can second guess yourself. Even though I was qualified and I was always training, someone who's majorly interested in always keeping up my CPD. That's one bit of being isolated, really, is that where you're not speaking to folk in your community or within a team, people don't often understand your advice. People don't often, really know the language that you're speaking about and why you're pushing for things to be done in a certain way. I mean, that's age old in comms and PR. We are a lot of the time not listened to, not understood. But the thing that happened for me when I was working in that sort of solo role or solo comms role was that, first of all, I joined Dan Slee's Headspace group, which is a Facebook peer-to-peer group, of which I'm now an admin. But there was the CommsCamp down in Sheffield, which was the first thing that I went to on my own. Not many Scottish-based folk would travel down south, really. So because it's kind of quite unusual, I think, for Scottish folk to go to these events down south. And at that point, it was a real turning point for my career and my life, actually, because from these events, I've made some amazing lifelong friends and friendships and peer support network, really. But walking into a room full of people that got and understood me, it's a bit like when I went to art college, so
Yeah.
I loved art college. I liked being a bit of a weirdo, and when I walked into that room full of these people, I just was like, here's my tribe, which sounds corny, but it truly was. Comms folk and PR folk are helpers.
Yeah.
We're a community of people that want to help. I mean, if you don't have that in your personality, you're not going to last long for the nature of the role. So, but in that room, I walked in and instantly was welcomed by people like Bridget Hearn, Emma Rogers, obviously Dan, who's running it. These are people who have led me and shepherded me throughout my whole career since that was about 15 years ago, probably now that happened, 12 to 15 years ago, can't remember. Yeah, and I think that's what happened really, was just coming across these people in a fairly I'd been in my career probably about 10 years at that point.
Yeah.
But finally being around folk that understood my role, understand the pressures of the role, and actually supported.
How did you build on that then? It's okay to go to an event, but to actually kind of build on that and build those relationships, how did that happen?
I'm Welsh and I chat a lot.
The perfect podcast guest.
I think it is that. It's been like in Wales, you have an expression of chopsy. I'm a bit chopsy, is what I'd say, a bit chopsy. I'm just interested. I think I can be gregarious in some ways, I suppose. And I will contribute, I guess. I'll contribute and then that will shine a light. I think what you said at the top of the chat there was about not always wanting to be in the limelight. I genuinely don't do it for that. I do it because I like to connect. I really like to connect with people, and I do genuinely like to help folk. I mean, it really is something that drives me professionally, and like when I do other things to sort of support other folk in their own development. So I think that just naturally came. Dan probably just saw me as someone that he could trust. I think, I'm a bit no nonsense. So on an admin role, he knows that I would moderate.
Can we just take a step back as well here, because we're aware of Headspace because of the work that we do, but there'll be quite a few listeners scratching their heads going, what is Headspace all about then? So can you give us a kind of little trot through that?
Yeah, so Dan Slee, who's somebody who worked in public sector comms at a council many years ago, set up a peer-to-peer Facebook group. It's a closed group. We're very strict about who can actually join. And it's literally a group for comms and PR professionals in the UK. And actually we have members from New Zealand and Canada as well, actually, who join sometimes. And in COVID times when we had CommsCamp online, they could join. So that was quite nice. And it's literally just a place. Chatham House rules, absolutely very strict about what gets discussed there is kept in the group. It doesn't matter what your job title is, what level you're at, what seniority you're at. You ask a question and you have an instant support group. It can be practical. It can be about vendor stuff, like, has anyone used this? What do they think? So it's powerful in terms of that. If people don't like your product, for instance, it's a powerful group for that, because folk will say how they're finding something. There's a lot of mental health support on the daily. There's a lot of people losing their jobs at the moment. When people on there put their hand up because they're feeling something, they'll just get a raft of PM me, DM me, you know, I've had this experience, I know how this is. That could just be feeling bullied at work. It could be like, I need to speak to somebody about 25 awareness days I don't want to do. How can I negotiate this conversation? It could be anything. But the point of the group really is that it's a safe space, but also, for me, most importantly, really, is that it's useful, right? So it's not there for a big, massive moan.
No.
Can be funny. We have a lot of laughs and a lot of, like, it's never spiteful.
No.
It's never, we do not allow other people to put other people down in the group in terms of people's work, and, like, you know what I mean? We can have a bit of a laugh, but there's boundaries within that about looking after folk outside of the group as well. So it's a powerful force for good, really. And then, CommsCamp, the actual in-person event, is related to it and came off it.
We set up this podcast because we wanted to kind of give something different than the more kind of London-centric activity and focus that our industry sometimes has. And you've been vocal about the kind of London-centric nature of comms. Although you've got that Welsh accent, that lovely Welsh accent, you're based up in Scotland, and I think we bonded over that breaking out of the bubble bit. What do people not understand about working regionally, do you think?
There's a couple of things there, and I suppose back to professional development, right? So I think in other jobs, so if you're a project manager or you're sort of in other roles, the training and the sort of development that you get is baked in. In comms and PR, you have to do a lot of that on your own, because they don't often understand how fast paced it is, and like what you have to do. If you want to be top of your game, you've got to be across everything all the time. So moving events and, professional development stuff to be just in London is really inaccessible to a lot of folks. So from a regional point of view, like me coming down from Edinburgh, if I'm self-funding, is a big do. That is a lot of money. In COVID times, everything went online. And actually, for me, in COVID, that just opened up this whole other world. And in those 2 years, 3 years, I had space, I had time, but had accessibility to the work that I would never have had. But I'm get a bit frustrated because I see it moving back to being London centric in terms of professional development. The major sort of support agencies being very London centric, and need to start thinking about what that actually means for junior staff and regional staff. It can be a bit cursory sometimes in terms of like, oh, we'll do this event here, we'll do this event there. But I do see it moving back that way again, which really frustrates me, actually. And there is actually no need for it. I mean, people can travel to the middle of the country. I'm not saying everything has to be in Scotland. We're not that well served here for events, really, although there is a total amazing comms and PR community in Scotland. And, there is a moan about that, I'd say. But regional folk, and especially in public sector, you have to know your regional audience, because it is completely different depending on where you live. Like, and obviously in Scotland, the laws are different here, policy is different here. It is a different country. Welsh people and English people probably similar, because it's under the same government. But in Scotland, it is completely different. It's just a completely different ball game if you're in public sector, particularly because of the way the country's run. And understanding that, and having the offer of that for training, to be aware of that is really important,
Was that one of the drivers then for bringing CommsCamp to Scotland when you did a few years ago, and how successful was that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been involved in the CommsCamp down south as a volunteer, having just been a participant very early days. And in CommsCamp, you pitch a session to the it's an unconference, so you pitch a session to the audience. I was fairly junior, I suppose, in my role or in my experience when I first went along, but didn't realise that then you can go into a room and you can do that. I did one on imposter syndrome. Prepped the session, did the session, and it was, just these little things that you do along the way can totally change your trajectory in terms of like your confidence and being seen and being listened to, and you have something to say and being real, like what this podcast is about. It's about being real. David and I, who's a fellow admin, both of us are obviously situated in Scotland, and we did feel very frustrated that there wasn't an unconference sort of event in Scotland. So we just made it happen. So we put our money where our mouth is, and that's what I say. We all have a bit of a moan about it, but do something about it then. And we did with a volunteer crew. So we did one a couple of years ago in November, would have been November 2023, and then we've just done the second one in Glasgow, both in Glasgow, just there in April. It's free. It's really important for me that we give these free events. It's accessible in terms of money and also accessible in terms of what people need in support on the day, if it's a bit much, if it's too busy. I'm really interested in, diversity, inclusion and accessibility in a wider sense. So making sure that the event is okay for folk attending. And it was like, people just love these unconferences because you can sit in a room, you always learn something. Again, you leave your job title at the door. Everyone has a voice in these sessions. The folk set their agenda and off you go, really. And it runs itself, really. Got a brilliant volunteer crew that it takes about a year to pull it together, get a bit of sponsorship. But, it's really, really important to me that we do have something useful, because for me, I get a bit bored at normal conferences, I'll be honest. Like, I just, it's very similar format where the agenda's set by the participants themselves, and it just makes it more real. They get from the day what they need. And I love to offer it. It's off the side of my desk. None of us are paid. Nobody makes any money. It's a not-for-profit. We have some sponsors that have been involved from early days that make it happen, so we can give a lunch. We have a curry the night before where everyone's welcome, so that if you are feeling a bit intimidated by it, like when I was there for the first time, I was there again to hold folk I always look out for the young practitioners. And there's a couple then that I brought on to be a volunteer. There's a girl, a young woman, sorry, not a girl. Ella, she works for Zero Waste Scotland. It's just these little things that you can do for folk that can really just lift them up, and bring them on. And I love that. That really is everything to me. Like, genuinely, I just love to like lift other folk up. And Sarah Waddington has done that for me countless times. Small ways, but she always says about sending the ladder down. It's a saying, and I love that. It stays in my mind a lot, and it doesn't cost you anything to send a ladder down in life.
Well, you had me at mushroom biryani. You mentioned Sarah Warrington there, and you've talked about being part of that socially mobile cohort being a changing point for you. For the benefit of the listeners, can you explain what socially mobile is and how you got involved and how it ultimately benefited you?
Oh, absolutely. So socially mobile is a 10-week course in communications management. So you get a certificate in communications leadership management, or can't quite let it trip off the tongue there, but it's basically a boot camp for everything you could possibly need to be a comms or PR practitioner. So what you'll find as you go on the course is that there'll be bits of gaps in your knowledge, especially if you come from a public sector background like I did, because a lot of the time, you don't have access to the particular tech stacks that you need to do your job. You'll always be a bit frustrated about measurement. There'll be bits of it you think, I wish I could just understand how to actually measure that. And it's all the practical elements that you might get agency side, you might get a private side that plugs a gap of knowledge. You're also taught by the most amazing, industry leaders in terms of lots of like creative stuff, financial stuff, again, use of AI, your tech stack, and it just opens your mind to information and people and leadership and about culture and about just all the things. If you want to step into the next part of your career, really, it'll set you up for that. For me, I'm a solo parent, and I've been a solo parent with my two children who are now teenagers, they're young adults now, from a young age. So I had to keep the wolf from the doors for most of my career, actually. But the time in which Socially Mobile started was when my daughter was going to high school. So it was time that I could, like, logistically and physically start to think about progression and career progression. Up until then, I needed to just make everything, spin the plates and make everything happen. So there's a section or a way you can apply for Socially Mobile for a funded place for a woman returner, which is what I went for. And I called, or I messaged Sarah. I didn't know her then as well, obviously, but I messaged her to ask if I could pay in installments because of skin, worked the NHS, always skin. And she said, if you're asking me that question, then you absolutely need to be on this course. And it just started a bit of a explosion for me in terms of progression and confidence and just being around folk. It was just a real eye-opener in terms of building on the CommsCamp stuff, building on the Headspace stuff about that I'm actually all right, I'm good at what I do.
Yeah.
And I do know what I'm doing. And the affirmation of when you kept quite small in a small team, people don't really understand what you're trying to do. You're working really hard on your knowledge, your understanding, your CPD. You're trying to give this information over, but you're not being heard because the other people are literally not speaking your language. And then you go into an environment like that where you're backed up and you're affirmed. The power of that for me, I can't undercook it. You do one exercise on Socially Mobile, which is about your personal branding.
Yeah.
And you have a good look at yourself, right? Yeah, in a professional sense, you have a good look at yourself. For me, it's about, there's always been something about the way I speak. People always say, where are you from? Like, are you Geordie? Because it's like a mix between, and then a bit of Scottish will come in, and and I've always apologized for that. And my background being like, from the Welsh Valleys, just didn't really have much growing up, didn't have particularly easy adolescence. And that all impacts you then in terms of like, and where you live regionally, back to the purpose of one of the purposes of this podcast is about that. And Socially Mobile, what happens is that, the people that are on that course, you're all coming from that, most of you are coming from, you have something that in your life that you don't maybe realize it massively at the time going into it, but you soon realize what that is and how you can address that and how you can continue to address that because it's not going to go away. And it's just a really powerful course in terms of the affirmation, but also the ability then that the tools that you need to progress as a practitioner, right? So I did the course, I got like Element T is the chair of the examiners, and she's just somebody else who's an amazing person, works in the oil industry in comms.
Yeah.
And she gave me the chief examiners for contribution. And again, that was just something that when you get acknowledged, when you're working bloody hard at something, it just, it's a boost. We're all human. We all need a boost.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that course then led me to chartership, because if you get the award, you get funded to be chartered. So I did my CIPR chartership, got through that. At the time, I changed jobs, and then a couple of years in a different NHS job. But the culture aspect of the work that you do and the Socially Mobile, I knew I needed to make big changes if I was going to be happy, and it allowed me the confidence to make a huge jump then into the role I'm doing now. But in my role as lead for Scotland, where I work now, I've also sponsored an individual as well. So paying it forward, and their story, the person that we've sponsored, their story just brings me so much joy.
We've talked a lot around the kind of support networks and the different connections that you've made over the years. Can we talk a little bit about some of the work that you've done and some of the campaigns that you've been involved in that have that you're proud of, that people might be aware of or may not have, that you really kind of look back on with a sense of that was a good piece of work?
Well, I've always worked in youth health, so I'm known for working in youth health, and I'm quite cheeky. So working in sexual health was probably a good mix. And pushing the boundaries within sexual health, there was plenty in there. There's probably 3 pieces of work that I've done over my career that I've been like, I'm really proud of, but there was a campaign for condoms, so free condoms, where it's for C Cards, which is our local free condom provision for young people in the main, which had animated Willie running around Edinburgh like a train spotting spoof. And that was made with Alive of Ideas, an agency based down south, who just absolutely love working with me, because they never knew when I was working in sexual health, they never knew what I was coming to them with. And it's just pushing the boundaries. And I was questioned, and Facebook banned the ads and I wasn't allowed to run them, and then it was all of that stuff. And then I did a campaign with Rebecca Roberts, who's also well known in youth comms, absolutely amazing practitioner, on enthusiastic consent. Well, that's our term for it, but young people, and getting them to just giving them the tools really to have the conversations about consent in relationships, and that is actually used in the Scottish curriculum now. So the films and the supplementary youth work, and and that was with a panel of young people. So that is taught through the curriculum. So
Wow.
I'm very proud of that. Very, very proud of that.
That's lasting impact there, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's just content that young people were like, they signed off the scripts. They were involved through the panel, through the youth panel. And these are young people who are in the communities and in over many communities for identity and gender, and and they thought it was all right. So, if they think it's all right and they weren't being polite, then we've done something well there. And then I suppose latterly is a campaign that I did about young people who in Scotland there's it's a Scandinavian model actually, but there's a provision called the Bairns House, which is a centre for young people who've been subject to abuse.
Right.
And it's where they go, so they don't have to go to court, so they can meet legal reps and things like that. If they can be interviewed there. So I did a bit of work with young people about explaining what the principles of the Bairns House were as they were being rolled out a couple of years ago in Scotland. And I really like working with those young people as well, because of their life experience and what they've been through. That was quite an interesting piece of work as well.
You're clearly passionate about that aspect of work. Where do you think that comes from?
Making it personal. I lost my mum when I was 17. She died very young at 39 to cervical cancer. After that, actually was made homeless, was living in my auntie's dining room floor for a wee while. Family relationships broke down. And I think I always look at teenagers and young people, and I really love teenagers and young people because they're really cool people. They're cool. And if you just stop and listen to them, you can learn a lot, and I think I always just feel like if I had a bit more support in my late teens, it is made me the person that I am. I'm mega resilient, and I don't know, I think it comes from that really. It's like when you have absolutely nothing in times of your life, like honestly, like I've been at a
Yeah.
cocktail and not knowing if I could pay for a bit of smash or something, like, or like literally that bad when I was about 18.
Wow.
And I think when you have that life experience, then you understand what it is to help others, do you know? Because you
Yeah.
want it yourself, because you need it yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I wasn't aware of that. So thank you for sharing that. And I guess that fuels this idea of helping others and sending the ladder down and motivates you to keep on helping people within the industry as well as through the campaign work that you do.
It just brings me joy, honestly. Like I'm buzzing today because somebody who's a very close friend of mine, I've I'd put her up for quite a significant award, and I hit learned last night she got it.
Oh,
And
excellent.
her reaction to that was just it's beautiful to help other people. I mean, I just think, why would you not, you know? And if I get a bit, and I have had it back, you know, from the likes of like Sarah Waddington and Avita actually, who's current CIPR, she's done me a few solids that, you know, put me in a room with her events, which are amazing,
Yeah.
when I couldn't afford to go, and helped me very quietly, very discreetly. And I just think it's really classy to be like that, you know, like it's really classy behavior to like just give someone a boost, you know, be there for them when you feel like they just need that bit. Like it can make all the difference. It's like a mental health intervention, isn't it? It's like
Yeah.
just checking in with someone, just giving them that wee nudge can be the difference in anything, you know what I mean? It can, especially the younger, I think for the younger folk coming up. I wish in my 20s, when I first sort of started working in comms, that if
Yeah.
I'd had a mentor, if I'd had someone, you know,
Yeah.
would things be different, you know?
You've kind of stolen my thunder because I was going to wrap up by asking if you gave some advice to your younger self, if you could go back to that young woman who was working two jobs and not feeling seen, and what would you want her to know now?
A, that she'll be all right financially, right? Because when you come from financial lack, it's really important in our industry, and back to the regional sort of element of, you know, one of the reasons that you've asked me to come on here, really. When you don't have the backup of, you know, a network and maybe you've been privately educated. I'm not got a chip on my shoulder about that. I don't, but you know, I had a good education. I worked hard, but if you have a bit of financial lack in your life at any point, it
Yeah.
can really be fundamental to the risks that you take. And, you know, for me, I stayed very slow, very low and safe for a long, long time. I loved what I did.
Yeah.
But if I'd have just jumped a bit sooner, then I would have probably progressed a lot sooner than I did do. So I think for me, it would be, what I'd say to her is take the risk because you'll be all right. You know, you'll be all right. And I'd also say get a mentor much earlier. Get a mentor much earlier than in your 40s, because, you know, that's probably the thing I've learned most of all in life, is that everyone needs that, and professionally as well. Just somebody to be at your back and giving you a bit of advice, I think can make a big difference in terms of the confidence to make a change, make a jump.
I think that's tremendous advice, and I've certainly benefited from the mentors in my life over the years. Although you probably won't know it by looking at and listening to me, but I wouldn't be where I am today. But it's not about me. Thank you, Leanne. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'm sure our listeners will get a great deal out of that. I feel buoyed and really like ready for the day having listened to this. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for asking me on. It's a pleasure.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to PR in the Real World. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could subscribe to the podcast and leave us a quick review. Your support really helps spread the word and reach more marketing and PR professionals just like you. And don't forget to share this podcast with your colleagues or anyone who'd benefit from the insights we share. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for more tips, strategies and real world stories from the PR frontlines.